The alien woman screamed. It was not a sound meant for ears alone. It tore through bone, through instinct, through the oldest parts of the mind where fear is born before thought. The Great Hall of Concord, carved from a single asteroid and reinforced with gravity anchors, shuddered as if struck by an invisible hammer. Light panels flickered. Energy shields rippled like disturbed water. Every non-human in the chamber reacted instantly. Scaled ambassadors flattened their crests and pressed their foreheads to the floor. Insectoid delegates locked their limbs tight against their thoraxes, playing dead by instinct older than their civilizations. Even the towering Karyun warlords, beings bred for conquest, their bodies wrapped in ceremonial armor forged from collapsed stars, lowered their massive heads and took one step back, because they knew the scream. All of them did. This was imperial fury, a biological, cultural, and psychological weapon perfected over tens of thousands of years. When an empress of the Aurelian Dominion screamed in anger, it was not merely an expression of emotion. It was a declaration, a verdict, a warning to the universe itself that mercy had ended. Worlds had burned after the sound. The alien woman stood at the center of the hall, tall and radiant, her form almost painfully precise. Her skin shimmered like polished obsidian veined with faint gold light, each pulse synchronized with her heartbeat. A crown of living crystal hovered just above her head, rotating slowly, feeding on emotional energy flooding the chamber. Her eyes, twin suns of molten amber, were locked on one figure, a human. She screamed again, louder this time, pouring centuries of dominance into a single moment. The sound carried encoded signals, submission triggers, ancestral terror cues, dominance hierarchies embedded deep in the nervous systems of lesser species. It was designed to end resistance before it could form. The air itself seemed to bow. Kneel! The command was woven into the scream, translated perfectly by every mind present. They did, all except one. The human stood still. No power armor, no rank insignia, no visible weapons. Just a man in a simple dark uniform, hands relaxed at his sides, breathing slow and steady as a scream washed over him like a storm against stone. Several ambassadors noticed it at the same time and froze in disbelief. He hadn't collapsed, hadn't screamed, hadn't dropped to his knees. He hadn't even stepped back. The alien woman felt it before she consciously understood it. The feedback loop, normally immediate and intoxicating, was incomplete. Her scream should have slammed into his mind, should have forced his nervous system to betray him. Instead, it met resistance. Not a shield, not a counterweapon. Silence. Her eyes narrowed. Impossible, whispered a Aurelian diplomat, its voice trembling through its translator node. No species resists imperial fury. Not without genetic modification. Humans are unmodified, another replied, horror creeping into its tone. They have no psychic organs, no dominance receptors. The alien woman lowered her voice, though the pressure in the chamber remained crushing. Human, she said, her words echoing with residual power. You stand accused of defiance against the Aurelian Dominion. You will kneel. This time, the command was spoken, not screamed. The human finally moved. Slowly, deliberately, he raised his head and met her gaze. Those watching felt a new kind of tension enter the room. Not fear, but uncertainty. His eyes did not glow. They did not harden with aggression. They were calm, observant, almost curious. I'm listening, he said evenly, but I won't kneel. The reaction was instant. Gasps rippled through the hall. A Karyun warlord's gauntlet clenched so hard that metal screamed. One of the insectoid delegates fainted outright, its translator chirping incoherently as it fell. The alien woman's crown flared bright gold. You deny my authority? She asked, her tone deceptively controlled. No, the human replied. I acknowledge it. I just don't fear it. That statement struck harder than any weapon. Fear was the foundation of the Dominion. Entire star systems paid tribute because of it. Rebellions ended before they began because of it. The scream ensured obedience without prolonged war. And this human, this insignificant representative from a young, fragmented species, had just declared himself immune. The alien woman stepped closer. Each step sent subtle shock waves through the floor, her presence bending gravity ever so slightly. She towered over him now, her shadow swallowing his smaller frame. "Every species fears something," she said softly. "If not pain, then loss. If not death, then extinction. You will scream eventually." The human inhaled, then exhaled slowly, as if grounding himself. "Maybe," he said, "but not because you're loud." That was when the room truly fell silent, not the forced silence of terror, but the stunned quiet of history hesitating, unsure which way to fall. The alien woman stared down at him, her fury burning hotter not because he challenged her, but because he had done so without hatred, without defiance, without emotional escalation. He wasn't fighting her. He was refusing to play the game. And for the first time since she had taken the throne, the scream that ruled the stars had failed to decide the outcome. The alien woman expected many things. Defiance. Terror masked as bravery. Even the desperate arrogance of a lesser species, standing on principle before inevitable destruction. What she did not expect was stillness. The human's heartbeat remained steady, not slowed by chemical suppression, not artificially controlled by implants. The biometric sensors woven invisibly through the chamber confirmed it in cold, unforgiving data. Calm, true calm, that unsettled her more than rage ever could. "Remove him," commanded one of the Dominion's high strategists, its elongated form flickering nervously as it consulted a holographic projection of the human nervous system. "His presence disrupts the psychic hierarchy of the hall." "No," the alien woman said, lifting one slender hand. Her eyes never left the human. "Let him speak." The chamber murmured in shock. Allowing a defiant subject to speak after imperial fury had been invoked was unheard of. Protocol dictated immediate punishment, psychic collapse, memory erasure, or ceremonial execution to reinforce dominance. Yet she hesitated, because something about him felt wrong, not dangerous, unmovable, human, she said, her voice now stripped of overt power but layered with razor-sharp authority. "Explain your resistance." The human took a moment before answering, not because he was afraid, but because he was choosing his words. "My name is Elias Morgan," he said at last. "I'm not here as a conqueror or a rebel. I'm here because someone had to speak without fear." Several delegates recoiled at the word. Fearlessness was not admired in the Dominion. It was considered unstable, even contagious. "You misunderstand your position," the alien woman replied. "You are alone. Your species is insignificant. Your worlds are tolerated only because they are not yet worth destroying." Elias nodded, acknowledging the truth of it without resentment. "That's fair," he said. "By your standards." She frowned. "By reality." "Reality depends on perspective," Elias answered calmly. "And yours is built on one assumption, that fear is universal." The high strategist hissed softly. "He's attempting philosophical evasion." "No," the alien woman said slowly. "He's attempting explanation." She stepped back, creating space between them. A subtle concession, unnoticed by most, but not by the elder diplomats watching with growing unease. "Explain," then she said. Elias exhaled. "Humans fear things," he began. "Pain, loss, death. We build entire cultures around those fears. But we learned something early in our history, something you never had to learn." He looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of beings who rule by terror. "When fear is constant," he continued, "it stops working." Silence. The words were simple. Dangerous. "We were afraid of predators," Elias said, "so we learned to face them. Afraid of nature, so we mastered it. Afraid of each other, so we created laws, ethics, restraint." The alien woman felt something uncomfortable stir beneath her composure. "You're suggesting fear can be exhausted?" she asked. "I'm saying it can be managed," Elias replied. "Trained, compartmentalized." One of the translators spiked as an untranslatable concept passed through. Emotional discipline under existential threat. The alien woman circled him slowly, studying his posture. His muscles were tense, yes, but controlled. His gaze tracked her movements without challenge, without submission. You stood through imperial fury, she said. That scream shatters minds. It shakes the part of the brain that panics, Elias answered. We train soldiers, medics, even civilians to function while that part is screaming. Her crown dimmed slightly, an unconscious reaction. Training, she repeated. Yes, Elias said. Breathing control, cognitive anchoring, emotional regulation. You didn't meet resistance, you met practice. The realization rippled through the chamber like a cold wave. If this were true, if humans could teach resistance to fear, then the Dominion's greatest weapon was not absolute. You are not special, then, the alien woman said, searching for weakness. Just conditioned. Elias smiled faintly. That's the point. A dangerous glint entered her eyes. Conditioning breaks, she said. Eventually. Only if it's forced, Elias replied. Ours is chosen. That stopped her. Choice was a concept the Dominion rarely entertained. Obedience was efficient. Fear was reliable. Choice introduced unpredictability. And you chose to stand here, she said, knowing I could end you with a thought. Yes. Why? Elias paused longer this time. Because if I kneel, he said quietly, then fear wins. And if fear wins here, today, then every future conversation between our species ends before it begins. The chamber felt different now. The alien woman sensed it, a subtle shift in the emotional spectrum. Fear was still present, but something else had joined it. Respect. Reluctant. Uneasy. Growing. She leaned closer, lowering her voice so only he could hear. You risk your extinction for words, she said. Elias met her gaze without flinching. No, he corrected softly. I risk myself so my species doesn't have to live on its knees. For the first time since the scream began, the alien woman felt something entirely unfamiliar. Not anger, not dominance. Doubt. And that doubt frightened her more than any rebellion ever had. Doubt was dangerous. The alien woman knew this better than anyone. Empires did not fracture from enemy fleets or rebel armies. They collapsed when certainty cracked, when rulers hesitated, when symbols lost their absolute meaning. And she was the greatest symbol the Aurelian Dominion had ever known. Yet here she stood, hesitating. The chamber's environmental systems adjusted automatically, responding to the subtle spike in her neural output. Gravity stabilized. Psychic dampeners activated at low levels. The hall itself sensed imbalance. She straightened, drawing herself to full height, and the crown above her head flared once more, brilliant, commanding, unmistakably imperial. Enough, she said. The word carried power, not as a scream, but as law. Every delegate stiffened. Fear surged back into the room like a familiar tide. This was the Empress they knew, the living weapon, the voice that ended arguments and civilizations alike. She turned fully toward Elias. You have spoken boldly, human, she said. You have explained your resistance. Now you will face judgment. A Karyan warlord stepped forward, massive form clanking. By Dominion precedent, defiance following imperial fury warrants annihilation or assimilation. Correct, the Empress replied. Elias did not move, did not speak, did not prepare to die. He simply waited. That, more than anything, unsettled her. She raised one hand. Psychic energy gathered around her fingers, visible now as thin strands of golden light. Not enough to destroy the hall, just enough to end one human life instantly. This ends now, she said. And then Elias spoke, not loudly, not urgently, calmly. Before you decide, he said, ask yourself one question. The Empress's hand paused midair. The entire chamber felt it. The impossible moment when an imperial execution was interrupted by a suggestion. Her eyes narrowed. You tread beyond permission. Yes, Elias agreed, because if I wait for permission, the answer's already decided. Murmurs spread. The high strategist shifted, uncertain whether to intervene. The Empress lowered her hand slightly. Speak. One question. Elias nodded, acknowledging concession. If your scream is absolute, he said, then why did you need to raise your hand? Silence fell, not forced, not fearful. Absolute. The question landed like a fracture in crystal. Her scream had always been enough. Always. Species collapsed under it. Leaders begged. Minds broke. She had never needed to follow it with violence. Until now, the Empress felt the truth before she could deny it. The scream had failed to finish the task. You interpret necessity as weakness, she said sharply. No, Elias replied. I interpret escalation as uncertainty. Gasps echoed through the chamber. To accuse the Empress of uncertainty was unthinkable. To do so calmly, without insult, without raised voice, was unprecedented. You claim your strength lies in silence, she said, circling him again. Yet you speak endlessly. Elias smiled faintly. Silence isn't the absence of sound. It's the absence of panic. That hit harder than the scream ever had. The Empress stopped moving. Her crown dimmed, then stabilized, its glow no longer feeding on terror, but hovering in a neutral state. She studied him, not as a threat, not as prey, but as a phenomenon. You are not immune to fear, she said slowly. I see it in your eyes. Elias nodded. Of course. I feel it, right now. Then why does it not control you? Because fear isn't the enemy, he said. Surrender is. The words echoed in her mind, colliding with doctrines taught since her ascension. Fear was control. Control was order. Order was peace. And yet, her empire was vast but brittle, maintained through constant pressure, constant dominance, constant screaming. How many times, Elias continued gently, have you screamed because you were angry, and how many because you were afraid of losing control? The chamber seemed to inhale. The Empress's fingers curled slowly, the gathered energy dissipating into nothing. She had never been asked that question, never needed to ask herself, until a human stood calmly beneath her raised hand and refused to be ruled by the oldest weapon in the galaxy. You challenge the foundation of the Dominion, she said quietly. No, Elias replied. I'm showing you its limits. She turned away from him and faced the assembled delegates. Tell me, she said, her voice carrying without force. What did you feel when I screamed? They hesitated. Fear had always been the correct answer. But now, a Virelian diplomat spoke cautiously. We felt safety, certainty, as we always have. Another voice followed, less sure. We felt obedience. A third, barely audible. We felt nothing new. The Empress closed her eyes. For the first time in her reign, the scream had not united the room in shared terror. It had been background noise. She opened her eyes and looked back at Elias. You have done something no enemy fleet has ever accomplished, she said. You made my fury insufficient. Elias bowed his head slightly, not in submission, but in respect. Fury is loud, he said. Control is quiet. The Empress felt the weight of that truth settle over her like a collapsing star. The scream that ruled the stars had met something it could not dominate. Silence. And in that silence, the empire began to change. Silence held, not the hollow quiet of fear after destruction, but a living pause, heavy with possibility. The great hall of Concord had witnessed wars declared and species erased, yet had never felt like this. The Empress of the Aurelian Dominion stood unmoving. Her crown, once blazing with terror-fueled brilliance, hovered dim and steady, no longer feeding on the emotional chaos of the room. The psychic currents that had always bent toward her dominance now flowed evenly. Balance, that alone was enough to terrify the high strategists. Your Majesty, one of them began urgently. This moment must be resolved. The delegates require certainty. Certainty. The Empress tasted the word and found it strangely lacking. She turned back to Elias Morgan, the human who had not knelt, not broken, not begged. You have forced this empire to a crossroads, she said. One path preserves tradition. The other invites instability. Elias met her gaze. Every stable system that never changes eventually collapses. Humans learned that the hard way. She studied him, searching for ambition. There was none. No hunger for power. No desire to dominate. Only resolve. What would you have me do? She asked. The chamber froze. An empress did not ask. She commanded, yet she had asked a human. Elias chose his words carefully. "Don't stop screaming," he said. "Just stop relying on it." Confusion rippled outward. "Fear is a tool," he continued, "but it can't be the foundation. Foundations have to hold when the tools fail." The empress turned slowly, addressing the assembly. "For millennia," she said, her voice clear and unamplified, "the Aurelian dominion has ruled through certainty born of fear. We believe this made us unchallengeable." She paused. Today, a single human proved otherwise. A wave of stunned murmurs surged through the hall. "Effective immediately," the empress continued. "Humans are to be reclassified." Strategists activated their displays instantly. From developing species, she said, to strategic equals. The word struck like a supernova. Protests erupted. They have no fleets to rival ours. No psychic weapons. No imperial lineage. The empress raised one hand. Silence returned, this time willingly. "They have something rarer," she said. "They cannot be ruled by fear." She looked back at Elias. "And any species that cannot be ruled by fear must be negotiated with or eventually fought at catastrophic cost." The Dominion understood cost. Negotiation was suddenly the cheaper option. "You will return to your people," the empress said to Elias. "You will tell them this. The Dominion does not kneel, but it will listen." Elias inclined his head. "That's all we ever wanted." As guards escorted him toward the exit, not as a prisoner, but as an envoy, the empress felt the empire shift around her. Old doctrines strained. New paths opened. A high strategist approached cautiously. "Your Majesty," the scream. "Will you abandon it?" The empress looked at her reflection in the polished obsidian floor. "No," she said, "but it will no longer speak for me." She turned back to the hall one last time. "Let today be remembered," she declared, "not as the day a human defied us." Her eyes followed Elias as he disappeared beyond the massive doors, but as the day fear lost its throne. Far across the stars, on a small blue world still unaware how close it had come to annihilation, sensors registered a shift in Dominion policy. No fleets mobilized, no ultimatums issued, no screams echoed through space. Only a single transmission, sent on open frequencies across 1,000 systems. The age of obedience has ended. The age of dialogue begins. And at the center of the greatest empire the galaxy had ever known, an empress stood in silence. No longer the loudest voice in the universe, but perhaps, for the first time, the wisest.